I suspected my wife was planning a divorce, so I moved my assets. And 2 weeks later, she filed. I never thought I'd find myself writing about something like this, but here I am, still trying to make sense of the last month. I'm 35, married, for 8 years, and until recently I honestly believed our marriage was stable. We didn't have major fights, we shared responsibilities, and life felt predictable. But the past few weeks have completely shattered that illusion. It all started with small things. My wife, Laura, who used to be open about finances, suddenly became secretive. She'd hide her phone screen when I entered the room, delete messages quickly, and sometimes avoid conversations about our plans. At first, I tried to chalk it up to stress at work or just needing space. But then more subtle signs started piling up. She began asking oddly specific questions about our investments in property. She seemed more interested than usual in our legal documents, wills, insurance policies, and even old tax forms. I'm not proud of this, but my gut started screaming that something was off. I tried to ignore it, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she might be planning something drastic, like a divorce. I had no proof, but intuition is sometimes louder than evidence. I started paying attention to her patterns. She suddenly had late-night work calls that she would take in another room. Friends mentioned that she'd been acting distant and distracted. Even casual comments from acquaintances hinted that she might be unhappy. None of this was concrete, but it added up. My mind kept circling back to one idea. What if she was quietly planning to leave and I'd be blindsided? The thought of losing everything I'd worked for, our home, savings, investments, terrified me. I wasn't willing to be caught off guard. So, I started gathering information, quietly, without confrontation. I checked bank statements, made sure I knew the details of our assets, and even spoke to a few trusted advisors under the guise of general financial planning. I wasn't snooping to attack her. I just needed to understand my position. Then came the decision. I had to protect my assets discreetly. I wasn't going to do anything illegal, but I had to make sure that if she tried to act on whatever plan she had, she wouldn't have leverage. I moved some of my personal accounts to separate institutions, restructured investments to be under my control, and made sure our major properties had clear titles. Every move was subtle, nothing obvious that would alert her. The next 2 weeks were tense. Laura acted normal, but there was a strange undercurrent, occasional cold glances, unanswered questions, and brief, almost nervous conversations. I continued with my routine, careful not to make her suspicious. I kept a calm exterior while quietly ensuring my position was secure. Then, almost like clockwork, she filed for divorce. I wasn't shocked. My suspicion had been correct. But I'll admit, I felt a strange sense of quiet satisfaction. Her timing, her confidence in her plan, was completely undone by my foresight. She probably thought she was walking into a guaranteed win. Instead, the playing field had shifted, entirely without her knowing. The filing itself was almost anticlimactic. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just a lawyer handing over the paperwork. But the look on her face, a mix of expectation and mild surprise, told me everything. I didn't gloat, I didn't react. I simply processed what had happened. 2 weeks of careful planning and cautious moves had ensured that the divorce wouldn't leave me vulnerable. In the days that followed, she seemed off, frustration mixed with confusion. I noticed small slips, comments about money she thought she'd control, subtle attempts to discuss settlement terms prematurely, and even half-hearted attempts to act casual. Clearly, she hadn't expected the game to turn out this way. Her plan had backfired, and she realized it slowly, painfully. I won't lie. Part of me felt vindicated. Not in a petty way, but in the sense that my instincts and caution had protected me. I had acted responsibly, strategically, and without malice. and yet there was still an underlying tension, a question of what her next move would be. Would she try to escalate, fight harder, or attempt some manipulation, or would she quietly accept the consequences of her miscalculation? I don't have answers yet, but for the first time in a long while, I feel a strange sense of control. I'm no longer walking blindly. I'm aware, prepared, and most importantly, protected. The uncertainty isn't gone. I know divorce proceedings are never simple, but I've reclaimed a measure of power in a situation that could have left me helpless. So here I am, sharing my story, partly for catharsis, partly to let others know that intuition and foresight matter. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't about distrust. It's about being proactive, smart, and cautious when something feels off. The next chapter? I don't know yet. But I can promise this. I'm calm, collected, and ready for whatever she throws next. And from where I stand, the playing field has never looked more even. Update 1: her plan backfired, and she tried to backtrack. Divorce drama unfolds. I honestly thought the divorce filing would be the worst part of this ordeal, but I quickly learned that was just the opening act. The day Laura filed was surreal, almost like watching a carefully staged play, except I was the only one who knew the script. She walked into our living room that morning with that same forced composure she always tries to perfect when she wants to appear confident. There was a hint of smugness in her eyes, a quiet certainty that she had me cornered before I even realized what was happening. She handed me the paperwork herself, smiling politely, like she was offering me a gift I wasn't supposed to refuse. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. Instead, I took the papers, scanned through them with methodical calm, noting every detail I already anticipated. In my mind, I was cataloging her strategy, the claims, the demands, the subtle pressure points she thought would overwhelm me. It was almost fascinating and infuriating to see her plan laid out so confidently, knowing it had already been rendered ineffective. Her first attempt to pressure me came immediately after she filed. She tried the classic emotional manipulation. "I can't believe you'd let it get this far," she said, voice trembling with false hurt. "After everything we've built, are you really going to let it end like this?" She leaned in, hoping for a reaction, maybe even tears, but I stayed calm. I had anticipated this. My response was quiet, controlled. "I'm responding to the situation responsibly. I'm not here to fight emotionally. I'm here to ensure fairness." She tried again, this time with threats, veiled but unmistakable. "You know, I could make this really difficult for you. I have options," she said, giving a half smile that was supposed to convey dominance. I didn't rise to it. In fact, I inwardly smirked. Those options she thought she had, rendered useless by weeks of careful planning. Every asset she assumed she could claim or leverage was already safely structured. Every contingency she imagined was neutralized. While she flailed emotionally, I began taking my own quiet, measured steps. I contacted my lawyer not out of panic, but to make sure our negotiations started on the right footing. I reviewed our accounts, double-checked investment structures, and made note of how she was trying to reposition herself, all while keeping a calm exterior. Every time she attempted to insert panic or guilt into the room, I responded with logic, clarity, and a steadfast refusal to be manipulated. Family and friends got involved next, as they always do in messy situations. Laura tried to rally sympathy, presenting herself as the victim of a cold, calculated spouse. She painted me as detached and unsympathetic, expecting people to rally to her side. But it didn't work the way she hoped. People who knew both of us well, our friends, even some relatives, could see through it. They sensed her desperation, the miscalculation that she hadn't anticipated. Instead of sympathy, she got awkward silence and questioning looks, and I'll admit that felt quietly satisfying. Over the next few days, the reality started sinking in for her. Her plan, so meticulously constructed in her mind, had backfired. She tried to negotiate, attempting half-hearted attempts to amend claims, hinting at settlements that would favor her, all while keeping a tone of false authority. But I was ready. I had prepared for every scenario. Every attempt at manipulation fell flat. Every demand she thought she could leverage was met with calm, reasoned counterpoints. There were small, almost imperceptible victories I noticed each day. My primary accounts remained untouched. Investments she assumed she could control were firmly under my oversight. The properties we owned were structured so that she couldn't claim more than her legal share. Even emotionally, I found a strange sense of empowerment. I wasn't just surviving this. I was navigating it strategically, like someone who had seen the map when others were stumbling blindly in the dark. The tension, of course, was still there. It wasn't all strategy and silent triumph. Part of me hurt. Seeing someone you've shared a life with act in bad faith is painful, even when you know you're prepared. Disappointment lingered in the air, a quiet ache at the thought of what could have been versus the reality of what was. Yet, alongside the hurt, there was a growing sense of clarity and empowerment. I wasn't a passive participant in my own life anymore. I had foresight, preparation, and control, tools she didn't anticipate. One particularly telling moment came during a conversation she attempted with our mutual friends. She casually mentioned, "I just want what's fair. I've always wanted fairness in this marriage." The irony was thick. We all knew she wasn't thinking about fairness, she was thinking about advantage. The friends she tried to sway could see it too. I watched her attempts at persuasion falter, her confidence waver, and the frustration start to show. It was a subtle, quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. Her frustration culminated in what could only be described as awkward attempts to negotiate face-to-face with me. She'd try different tones, pleading, reasoning, even hints of charm, all to see if she could make me slip. But I held my ground, calm, measured, unmoved. I realized that this wasn't just about money or assets anymore. It was about control, about proving dominance in a situation she thought she had mastered. And she was failing. Emotionally, it was draining, but it also reinforced a truth I hadn't fully appreciated before. Foresight and composure are incredibly powerful. By anticipating her moves, by calmly and quietly preparing for the worst, I'd managed to turn what could have been a devastating situation into one where I held leverage. Every manipulation she attempted was countered, every expectation she had of advantage was neutralized, and every assumption she made about my vulnerability was shattered. Now, a week into this, I can see her recalculating. There's a tension in her demeanor I've never seen before. The subtle cracks of someone realizing that their strategy has failed. And while part of me feels a quiet vindication, I also know the road ahead isn't over. There are still negotiations, still discussions, still the inevitable moments where she will try to find a way to regain control. But for now, I remain calm. I remain prepared. And I remain in control in ways she never anticipated. It's strange, writing this down, but I feel a mix of emotions I didn't expect. Hurt, yes, disappointment, certainly, but also empowerment and clarity. I'm learning that protecting yourself isn't about pettiness or suspicion. It's about foresight, planning, and calm decisiveness. And seeing someone try and fail to manipulate you after they thought they had the upper hand is oddly, deeply satisfying. I don't know what her next move will be. Will she try a last-ditch attempt at negotiation, or will she accept that her plan has failed? Either way, I feel ready. I feel steady. And for the first time in weeks, I feel like I'm no longer reacting. I'm leading in my own way through a storm that could have blindsided me. Update 2. The fallout and emotional turmoil. She's running out of moves. If I thought the first week after Laura filed for divorce was tense, I was wrong. That was just the warm-up. The real pressure came once the day-to-day reality of the yeah proceedings set in. It wasn't just paperwork and legal terms anymore. It was two people sharing the same space while pretending not to be at war. We still lived in the same house, at least temporarily. That meant mornings where she'd walk past me in the kitchen without saying a word, her eyes full of unspoken resentment. It meant sitting in the same living room, both of us glued to our phones, pretending the other didn't exist. Every mundane interaction, deciding who got the car that day, figuring out meals, was loaded with quiet hostility. She started weaving manipulation into the small moments. One morning, she accidentally left a framed photo of us from our honeymoon on the kitchen counter, like she wanted me to remember what we once had. Another night, she came into my office wearing the same perfume she used to when we first dated, lingering in the doorway as if expecting me to engage. When I didn't, she sighed and muttered, "You've really changed." Part of me felt the sting of those moments, the reminder of the person I thought she was. But another part knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't trying to reconnect out of love. She was trying to blur the lines, to make me hesitate, to create cracks in my resolve before the negotiations. And yet, I couldn't help reflecting on how we got here. 8 years of marriage, and, somewhere along the way, trust eroded so quietly that I didn't see it until it was too late. I replayed memories in my head. The good ones, the fights, the little red flags I ignored. Was it her ambition? Was it my focus on work? Was it that we stopped truly talking? The honest truth was a mix of all those things. But the moment she started planning in secret, without even giving the marriage a fighting chance, something fundamental broke. Her desperation began to seep through more openly as the days went on. She went from cold and distant to strangely warm and friendly, almost too much. She'd make my favorite dinner just because, or send me texts about funny things that happened at her work. The whiplash was obvious. She wasn't trying to repair our marriage. She was trying to soften me up for what she thought would be her financial advantage. When that didn't work, she pivoted. She started trying to influence the people around us. A few of our mutual friends suddenly reached out to hear my side of the story, clearly after she'd already given them hers. My cousin told me she'd heard Laura was concerned about my mental health, painting me as unstable. That one infuriated me, not because I believed anyone who truly knew me would buy it, but because it showed how far she was willing to go to sway public perception. The good news? Most people didn't buy it. They'd seen enough of her subtle manipulations to know better. But the social pressure was still exhausting. Every text, every phone call felt like a potential probe into my life. I learned quickly to be vague and measured with everyone because anything I said could be repeated and twisted. Meanwhile, the legal process ramped up. Negotiations began, and this is where my preparation really paid off. Without going into technical details, I'll say this. Every asset she assumed she had a claim to was either legally shielded or structured in a way that made her demands unrealistic. My lawyer and I were calm and methodical, while hers seemed increasingly frustrated. She tried to push for an aggressive settlement, but the numbers didn't support her narrative. I stayed professional in the meetings, never letting emotion dictate my tone. That alone seemed to throw her off. She came in expecting me to crack under pressure, to argue or lash out. Instead, I was calm, composed, even polite, which only made her appear more agitated by comparison. There's a certain power in being the one who doesn't lose composure, and I could tell she hated it. Emotionally, though, I was far from unaffected. There were nights I sat alone in my office, staring at the divorce papers, feeling the weight of what we'd lost. Anger at her betrayal mixed with grief for the marriage I thought we had. Sometimes I even questioned myself. Had I been too focused on protecting myself and not enough on trying to save the relationship? But then I'd remember the secrecy, the lies, the calculated timing of her filing, and the guilt would dissolve. Then came a revelation I hadn't expected. During a particularly tense negotiation session, my lawyer presented documentation that contradicted one of her financial claims. The source of the contradiction? A payment she'd made from a joint account to cover expenses that weren't exactly shared. I won't spell it out here, but the implication was obvious, and so was the person she'd been spending it on. My stomach turned, and in that moment, a lot of things clicked. Infidelity wasn't something I had suspected outright, but the puzzle pieces fit. The secrecy, the late nights, the sudden push for divorce. It all made more sense now. I didn't confront her directly, not yet. But that knowledge became another layer of clarity for me. This wasn't about two people growing apart. This was about her making choices she couldn't come back from. After that, her behavior shifted again. The charm attempts stopped. The desperation turned into something colder, more calculated, but also tinged with unease. I think she realized I might know more than I'd let on, and that made her cautious. The upper hand she thought she had was gone, and she knew it. Personally, I started feeling stronger, more assertive. The same foresight that helped me protect my assets was now helping me navigate the emotional battlefield. I stopped engaging in her mind games altogether. If she tried to bait me into an argument, I'd simply leave the room. If she tried to guilt me, I'd acknowledge her words without taking the bait. It was like watching a chess match where my opponent kept making the same moves, hoping for a different outcome. One night, about 3 weeks into the proceedings, she knocked on my office door. She didn't look smug anymore, she looked tired. She sat down across from me and said, "We don't have to do this the hard way." I simply asked, "And what would the easy way look like for you?" She didn't answer directly, just stared at me for a long time before saying, "You've changed." I didn't respond. That silence said more than words could. But here's where things take a turn. Yesterday, during a routine pre-court review with my lawyer, he told me something that made my stomach drop. Apparently, Laura's side has filed a new motion, something that could potentially delay the proceedings and create complications I hadn't anticipated. He wouldn't tell me all the details yet, but hinted that it involves evidence she claims to have. Whether it's real or just another manipulation tactic, I don't know. But I do know this. She's not done playing her game. And while I'm more prepared than ever, this feels like the opening move in a new phase of our battle. I'll find out exactly what she's up to in court next week. Whatever it is, I'm ready. At least, I think I am. Final update. Closure and moving forward, it's over. The divorce is finalized. After months of tension, legal wrangling, and more emotional games than I care to count, I finally walked out of the courthouse today with the kind of peace I didn't think I'd feel again. The final settlement was exactly what my lawyer and I had projected. My preparation from the very beginning, moving assets, restructuring accounts, keeping calm during negotiations, paid off. The division was fair on paper, but in reality, it was far from the windfall she'd imagined. She got what she was, legally entitled to, and nothing more. No surprise property claims, no hidden account discoveries, no inflated alimony demands. Every single attempt she made to push for more had been methodically dismantled before it even reached the courtroom. Her reaction in court was telling. Gone was the smug confidence she'd carried when she first handed me the divorce papers. She kept her eyes down most of the time, avoiding mine. When the judge read the final terms, I caught a flicker of frustration on her face, followed by something that looked a lot like regret. She didn't say a word to me when it was over, just gathered her things and walked out. No dramatic exit, no parting shots. Just silence. As for me, I felt nothing but relief. There wasn't a single part of me that wanted to gloat. The satisfaction came not from seeing her lose, but from knowing I had protected myself and navigated the storm without letting it consume me. Months ago, I might have wanted her to see me as the one who won. Now, all I wanted was for this chapter to be over so I could move on with my life. In the quiet after the courthouse, I sat in my car for a while and thought about everything that had happened. I realized that while this experience had been brutal, it had also been clarifying. It forced me to confront hard truths about myself, about trust, and about how easily a stable life can be upended when you're not paying attention. I learned that boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're about having the foresight to protect yourself before someone even crosses the line. Looking back on our marriage now, I can see the cracks that were there long before the divorce. Filings, the late-night absences, the casual lies, the subtle testing of boundaries. They were all signs I chose to overlook. I won't make that mistake again. The lesson here wasn't about cynicism. It was about awareness. Love doesn't require blind trust. It requires clear eyes, honest conversations, and yes, a willingness to protect yourself when things stop adding up. Life after divorce feels surprisingly light. I've reconnected with old friends, thrown myself into a few personal projects I'd been putting off, and started getting back into hobbies I'd abandoned. I even joined a hiking group, something Laura always dismissed as a waste of a Saturday. For the first time in a long while, my weekends are my own, and I'm filling them with things that actually make me happy. There's even someone new in my life. Nothing serious yet, but it's refreshing to spend time with someone who isn't. Playing games, someone who doesn't see relationships as a competition for control. We've been on a handful of dates, and while I'm not rushing into anything, it feels good to be reminded that connection doesn't have to be complicated. As for Laura, from what I've heard through the grapevine, the social circle she tried, so hard to influence during our divorce, has cooled toward her. People notice the inconsistencies in her story, the way she tried to manipulate the narrative, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. I didn't need to tell my side. She told it for me without even realizing it, just by showing people who she really was. That's the kind of poetic justice you can't plan, but it's satisfying all the same. If you followed my updates, here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it, because it's uncomfortable to confront. Protect yourself, legally, financially, and emotionally, before you're forced into a corner. And when you do act, do it calmly and quietly. There's a certain power in moving strategically without letting the other person know they've already lost the advantage. This wasn't the life path I expected, but it's the one I'm on now, and I feel stronger for it. I walked through the kind of storm that can break people, and instead of breaking, I learned how to bend just enough to survive it. The old version of me might have been blindsided by this. The version of me now, he's paying attention, and he's not afraid to act. So here's to the next chapter. One I'll enter without resentment, without unfinished business, and without the baggage of someone else's bad decisions. And if I ever see Laura again, I'll nod politely and keep walking, because the best revenge I can think of is living a life so good, she'll have no choice but to realize I never needed her approval, her love, or her control to be happy. I'm not just moving on, I'm moving forward.